Joining us right now to talk a little Texas and national political news, GOP political strategist, co-founder of MustReadTexas.com, Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Chad.
How's it going?
It's going great. How about you?
Doing all right. Appreciate you joining us today. Let's kind of take a look at some national news. 2016, a big story out there over the weekend, and Rand Paul making some inroads in at least to a little bit of Texas politics here in the state, and he's really taking a look and focusing hard, it seems, on the state of Texas.
Sure, and it's natural for a couple reasons. You know, one, obviously, he's from here, grew up in the Lake Jackson area. His dad was obviously in Congress, and then he attended Baylor University. Two, Texas is the most reliable fundraising location for Republicans at the national level, and so you can't just raise money here, without a team, without really working it for a good period of time. And then three, and this is a point that's been, I think, underreported, and the Republican primary calendar is not yet finalized, but it looks like Texas will be fifth, the fifth state. Now, it looks like our primary will be Tuesday, March 1st, and the only states that will go before it will be Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. Now, on Tuesday, March 1st, there may be a number of other southern states. It's looking like there may be sort of an SEC primary. But so for the first time in a long time, it looks like Texas is going to matter not just from a fundraising perspective, but also from a political perspective in the presidential primary process. And so it makes perfect sense that Rand Paul would be doing everything he can to compete in Texas because it's going to matter.
What do you think? What does it say to you that the former Republican chairman of the state of Texas joined Rand's campaign?
Yeah, look, I don't think this is insignificant. I think Steve Ministeri is very talented. He's been around a long time. He's been in politics 30 years. He and Rand go back to their Young Conservatives of Texas days. They've been friends for 35 years. And so at the end of the day, I think he chose Rand Paul for two reasons. One, there's really a long-lasting personal relationship. And two, I think he really likes what Rand has talked about really trying to grow the party and do that through outreach. I mean, that really parallels nicely with what Ministeri has done at the state party. They've done a significant amount of Hispanic and African-American outreach. So, yeah, I think it does matter. I mean, Ministeri is going to be able to make introductions to donors and activists and help them organize in Texas. And I can think of almost no person in Texas that could help Rand Paul do that better.
There was a report out that apparently the Cruz camp had asked Ministeri to join in with them, and he decided to go with Paul, and I'm sure there were others who might have inquired about Ministeri coming over to their camp. But is it a slap in the face to Ted Cruz, or did it really just have to go back to the relationship that he had with Rand Paul dating back for years?
Yeah, I think it's primarily that relationship. It looks like he's going to be a fairly senior member of the Rand Paul team. I don't know whether that kind of opportunity was there for him with Cruz's team. When you're from a state, sometimes you don't necessarily think you need to have a lot of strength from that state with your team. You feel like you have pretty good chance to win your home state, and that you don't need to do a lot to see that happen. Of course, with Texas, you're likely to have two Texans with Cruz and Perry competing for the nomination. But no, I wouldn't read too much into that Cruz thing. That was probably sort of initial discussions. Where I think this Rand Paul thing was probably in development far longer.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak, what do you make of Mitt Romney deciding not to run? Does that obviously in the short run, it probably helps Jeb Bush out a little bit, but it's not like Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush are best friends out there. So I don't know if this is necessarily a signal from Mitt Romney saying, okay, this is Jeb's torch now. Does this leave an opening for others to really get in?
I think it helps Jeb because the Mitt Romney donor universe is now likely to move, pretty quickly over to Jeb Bush. There will be exceptions to that will go to Chris Christie or Rubio or Scott Walker, but for the most part, I really think that major donor community, which likes to see a sort of mainstream establishment frontrunner who can, quote, be electable, I think they'll really run to him. I also think it helps Chris Christie, instead of having that establishment part of the bracket, separated three ways, it's now separated two ways. And if Jeb were to falter or not perform well, Christie could benefit from that. But I think this is really wide open. I think you can draw up a first tier of this thing with 8 candidates in it who all have their own path and who all have a chance to be the nominees. So this thing remains very wide open.
Why do you think Scott Walker is suddenly surging in some of the polls? Is it just because of the Iowa Freedom Conference that he was part of? People, I guess, becoming more aware of him and his ideas.
Yeah, I think he's been ripe for a little bit of a surge for a long time, and keep in mind there were only, I think, a few hundred people who saw that speech firsthand, but it got a lot of attention and it got a lot of coverage, not just nationally, but also in the state of Iowa on television and newspapers across the state that were covering that event. So I don't want to make too much of it. He was still only at like 15%, I think, in the Bloomberg Politics Des Moines registered poll of Iowa, but he did surge from somewhere in the middle of the pack to somewhere at the top, or actually to the top. So, look, Walker is built for Iowa. He's from a neighboring state. He has a great record. He's a solid conservative. He's extremely authentic. I think he could be a real threat to win Iowa. And if he wins Iowa, there's a chance I think he'll be one of the final probably 2 candidates in this primary.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak and Rick Perry, also making a little bit of news over the weekend, and he Walker and a few others of the either former governor or current governors have had the same mantra of we need a governor in 2016. It's one thing to talk about being a conservative. It's one thing to talk about being opposed to Obama. It's another thing to actually do something. And that's been Perry's argument. Do you think that that's going to play well out there on the campaign trail? The argument of look at my resume versus someone like a Rand Paul or a Ted Cruz.
I think it is going to play well. I think people do like that executive experience, and it is a fairly effective, contrast for governors to draw. And I think you're going to hear a lot of the governors do that. Now that said, the downside to that is that senators do have national security and foreign policy experience because, there's 3 primary committees that have jurisdiction, and pretty much every senator is on at least one of them. And, Rubio at the Coke Conference in California 2 weekends ago said, if you just, spend a day in London, it doesn't make you Winston Churchill, I think he said, or Margaret Thatcher, and he's right. And you're starting to see these governors travel. Chris Christie was in London over the weekend. I think Scott Walker's going to London at the end of this week. And so building up that foreign policy and national security credential takes time. It's hard for governors to do. They have day jobs. Those issues aren't necessarily part of their day job. So there is going to be sort of that back and forth where senators prove that they are ready to be commander-in-chief on those issues, while governors prove they're ready to be commander-in-chief in terms of the executive experience.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak, taking a look just down at the state capitol for a little bit. It seemed as though last week for about a day, Dan Patrick sort of stepped in it with some comments on open carry, and then he clarified his stance that he'll move forward on open carry if the votes are there, and there was a little bit of a brouhaha down in Austin over this. Let me ask you this. What are you hearing about open carry down in Austin? Is it something where some of these gun rights groups have really hurt their own cause by some of the ways they've presented themselves? And, with a Texas Senate that is probably the most conservative we've seen in a long time, is this really an issue where there aren't votes there to support open carry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Patrick did say he didn't think the votes were there to pass open carry this session in the Senate, and that was a surprise because you do have, 20 Republicans out of 31, and it would surprise me if those votes weren't there because most of them are pretty strong Second Amendment supporters. It has been striking the over-the-top antics that some of these groups have used, going in and threatening members of the legislature and using over-the-top language. I think they've really done their cause a disservice. But yeah, look, I think Patrick did take on some water early in the week because of what he said, and whether it passes the Senate outright or whether you have this sort of lower level of open carry that they're calling constitutional carry, which essentially I think you have to maybe have a permit. It's kind of like concealed carry almost. Whether that version passes at a lower level than fully open carry, I think remains to be seen. And whether something like this can get through the House, I think is a totally separate question.
Yeah. All right, it's something to take a look at. Matt, what can people find on MustReadTexas.com this week?
Yeah, 2016 news about Perry and Cruz traveling all over, and obviously beginning to cover the legislative session. You have budgets out from the House and Senate. As things wrap up there, you can find all the news at MustReadTexas.com.
All right. Matt, as always, appreciate your time, and people can follow you on Twitter at Matt Mackowiak, and we'll talk to you again next week.